The text message arrived at 4:32 on a Tuesday morning. 3 words that would change everything. They're selling them. Captain Reese Kincaid stared at the glowing screen in the darkness of her bedroom, her heart already accelerating before her mind fully processed the implications. The number was blocked, the sender unknown, but the message was clear enough to pull her from sleep and into the kind of alertness that came from years of training her body to respond to danger before her conscious mind could catch up. A second message followed. Fort Carson Disposition Center. Today, all of them. Your dogs. Reese sat up, the movement sharp and controlled despite the chaos beginning to build in her chest. Beside her bed, Havoc lifted his head. The Belgian Malinois had been asleep 3 seconds ago, but now his amber eyes were locked on her face, reading the shift in her breathing, the tension in her shoulders, the particular quality of stillness that meant something was wrong. "Get up, boy," she said quietly. "We're going to work." Havoc was on his feet before she finished the sentence. 6 years old, 70 pounds of muscle and loyalty, and a legend in the circles that mattered. The dog had cleared compounds in Kandahar, detected explosives in Helmand Province, and saved Reese's life twice in ways that made for good stories at veteran bars, but nightmares when she tried to sleep. She dressed in the dark. Not her uniform. That part of her life was technically over. Medically retired 27 months ago after an IED blast had torn through her left leg and ended the career she'd fought harder for than anything in her 29 years. But she pulled on cargo pants, a black tactical shirt, boots that still fit like they remembered every mile she'd put on them in Afghanistan. Old habits, muscle memory, the ritual of preparing for a mission even when you weren't sure what the mission was yet. Fort Carson was 3 hours away. Reese grabbed her keys, clipped Havoc's lead, and walked out into the pre-dawn cold without looking back. Behind her, the small house she rented on the outskirts of Colorado Springs sat dark and silent. The kind of place a person lived when they were trying to figure out who they were now that they weren't who they used to be. She drove fast. Havoc sat in the passenger seat the way he always did on long drives, rigid and alert, ears rotating like radar dishes picking up frequencies Reese couldn't hear. The dog knew. Dogs always knew. Something was happening. Something that required the part of them that had been forged in combat and couldn't be turned off no matter how many months passed in civilian silence. Reese's mind worked through the possibilities as the highway unwound in front of her headlights. Fort Carson had a military working dog program. She knew that. She'd served there briefly in 2022, right after Afghanistan, before the medical board had started the long process of deciding she was too broken to continue. But she'd kept in touch with people, handlers, trainers, the community of men and women who understood that the bond between a soldier and their dog wasn't just professional, it was something deeper, something that civilians looked at and nodded politely about, but never really understood. "Your dogs," the text had said. Reese didn't have dogs anymore. Singular, maybe, Havoc, but dogs, plural, that was something different. That was the unit she'd commanded before the blast, the K9 program she'd built in Afghanistan, the animals she'd trained and deployed with and brought home and handed off to other handlers when the Navy decided Captain Reese Kincaid was no longer fit for duty. The disposition center was on the south side of the base, a cluster of low buildings that looked like they'd been assembled from the cheapest contract bid and forgotten about. Reese pulled into the parking lot at 7:47, 3 hours after the text, her body running on adrenaline and the kind of focus that came from years of operating on no sleep and high stakes. There were cars, a lot of them, civilian vehicles parked in haphazard rows like this was a yard sale, not a military facility. Reese felt something cold settle into her stomach as she climbed out of the truck. Havoc jumped down beside her, immediately scanning the area, nose working, body tense. "Easy," Reese murmured. "Let's see what we're dealing with." She heard the dogs before she saw them. Not barking, crying. The sound hit her like a physical blow, stopping her mid-step just inside the gate. It was the kind of sound that didn't come from an animal that was hungry or cold or bored. It came from something that remembered being loved and understood it had been forgotten. Reese had heard that sound once before, in a village outside Kandahar, from a dog chained to a post outside a compound her team had just cleared. The handler had been dead inside. The dog had still been waiting for him to come out. She'd carried that sound in her chest for 4 years. And now it was coming from inside a military facility on American soil. The disposition center's main building was a converted warehouse, concrete floors and metal walls that amplified every sound. Reese pushed through the entrance and stopped. 40 people, maybe more, milled around in the open space. Civilians, contractors, men in leather vests checking clipboards. A woman with a camera photographing something Reese couldn't see yet. 2 guys in the back corner arguing about bloodlines and breeding potential like they were shopping for furniture. And in the center of the room, arranged in 2 neat rows of 6, 12 German shepherds sat locked in transport kennels, metal cages barely large enough for the animals to stand, turn around, lie down. Some of the dogs were pacing in tight circles. Some were pressed against the back walls, trembling. Some were lying flat with their eyes open, breathing shallow, the canine equivalent of a 1,000-yard stare. Reese felt the world narrow, sound faded. The people around her blurred into background noise. All she could see were the kennels. All she could hear were the dogs. And all she could feel was a rising tide of rage, so pure and focused it was almost calming. She walked forward. Havoc moved with her, close to her left leg, his body language shifting from alert to something harder, battle-ready. The dog could feel it too. Whatever this was, it was wrong. The first kennel she reached contained a massive shepherd with a barrel chest and a scar running from his left ear to his jaw. Reese knew that scar, knew that dog. "Ajax," she whispered. The dog's head snapped up. His ears rotated forward. His eyes, which had been empty and distant, suddenly focused with an intensity that made Reese's throat tighten. Ajax had served in Syria 3 years ago. She'd been there. She'd watched this dog detect 17 improvised explosive devices in a single week, saving an entire platoon from walking into ambushes that would have killed everyone. Now Ajax was in a cage at what looked like an auction, and nobody around him seemed to understand or care what he'd done, what he'd sacrificed, what he was. Reese moved to the next kennel. Scout, explosives detection dog, 6 years of service, the best nose Reese had ever worked with. Scout was lying flat, chin on his paws, eyes open but empty. He didn't react when Reese approached, didn't lift his head, just lay there breathing, as if he'd already accepted that nobody was coming. The next kennel, Storm, patrol and pursuit dog, the fastest shepherd Reese had ever seen in the field. Storm was pacing in tight circles, his breath coming in short, panicked bursts. His body was thinner than she remembered. His coat was dull. His eyes were wild. "Jesus," Reese breathed. She reached the last kennel in the first row and her heart stopped. Ghost. The name hit her like a fist. Ghost. Garrett Thorne's dog, the Belgian Malinois who had deployed with Reese's best friend, her mentor, the man who had taught her everything about canine operations and believed in her when the entire system was telling her that women didn't belong in combat units and certainly didn't belong commanding canine programs. Garrett had died 28 months ago in Yemen. Operation Sandstorm, a raid gone wrong. Reese had been stateside by then, fighting her medical discharge, watching from the outside as the news came through official channels. Lieutenant Commander Garrett Thorne, killed in action, heroic sacrifice. The blast had been catastrophic, but Garrett had shielded Ghost with his body, and the dog had survived. Reese had asked about Ghost afterward, had been told the dog was transferred to another unit, had been told not to worry about it, had been told to focus on her own recovery and let the system handle the rest. The system had handled it, all right. handled it right into a metal cage at a surplus disposal event. Ghost was lying on his side, ribs showing through dull, matted fur, eyes half closed. He looked like a dog that had stopped waiting, stopped hoping, stopped believing that anyone was ever going to keep the promises that had been made to him. Reese dropped to her knees in front of the kennel. Ghost, the dog's ear twitched. One eye opened wider. Then something shifted behind that eye. Recognition, slow and painful, like a light flickering on in a room that had been dark for too long. "Hey, buddy," Reese said, her voice cracking. "It's me. It's Reese. Garrett sent me." Ghost lifted his head slowly, like the effort cost him everything he had left. He crawled forward, belly dragging on the kennel floor, until his nose pressed through the bars and touched Reese's fingers. Then the dog made a sound. Not a bark, not a howl. A cry that carried 28 months of grief and confusion and waiting in it. A cry that said, "I remember. I remember the smell of him. I remember the sound of his voice. I remember the night he didn't come back. And I've been waiting for someone, anyone, to tell me it wasn't my fault." Reese's vision blurred. She gripped the kennel bars and pressed her forehead against the metal and let the tears come, because there was no way in hell she was going to pretend this was okay. Havoc pressed against her leg, whining softly, feeling the grief vibrate through his handler's body and responding the only way a dog knows how, by being there, by not leaving. "What happened to you?" Reese whispered. "What did they do to you?" "Ma'am, the bidding area is to the left." A young petty officer appeared beside her, clipboard in hand, clearly uncomfortable. The way people are when they sense danger they can't see. "Who authorized this?" Reese stood up. Her voice was controlled, but the petty officer took a step back anyway. "Ma'am, these dogs are—" "I know what these dogs are. I commanded half of them. Ajax cleared 17 IEDs in Syria. Scout detected a suicide vest at a checkpoint in Iraq that would have killed 30 Marines. And Ghost," Reese's voice tightened. "Ghost was the K-9 partner of Lieutenant Commander Garrett Thorne, who died in action 28 months ago, saving that dog's life." The petty officer looked genuinely distressed. "I'd have to check with Commander Reeves, ma'am. He's running the disposition event." "Then get him." The petty officer hurried away. Reese turned back to the kennels, counted again. 12 dogs. She recognized 8 of them. 8 animals that had served in her units, under her command, in operations that saved American lives. And now they were lined up in metal boxes like surplus inventory, waiting to be liquidated. She walked to a folding table near the entrance, where a man in Navy service khakis sat with a clipboard and a cash box. Mid-40s, soft-bodied, with the pale complexion of someone who'd spent his career behind a desk. A name placard read, "Commander Frank Reeves." "Commander," Reese said, "what is this?" Reeves looked up with the practiced patience of a bureaucrat dealing with someone he considered beneath his pay grade. "Surplus Animal Disposition Event. Dogs that have been retired from the MWD program, available for civilian transfer. Are you interested in bidding?" "These are military working dogs." "Retired military working dogs," Reeves corrected without looking up from his clipboard. "They failed their behavioral assessments, deemed unsuitable for continued service. The evaluations are conducted by certified military veterinary behaviorists. The results are documented and reviewed. Standard disposition protocol." "That's a lie." The words landed on Reeves's table like a grenade. 2 nearby officers turned. The petty officer with the clipboard froze mid-step. Reeves's eyes went cold. "Excuse me?" "I said that's a lie. Ajax doesn't have an aggressive bone in his body. Scout is the calmest detection dog I've ever worked with. And Ghost," Reese leaned forward, her hands flat on the table. "Ghost was evaluated 6 months after Garrett died and cleared for continued service. I saw the report myself. So either someone falsified the assessments or you're lying to my face." "You're out of line, Captain." "I'm out of line?" Reese's voice rose, and every dog in the facility reacted, barking, whining, pressing against their kennels. You've got 12 decorated military working dogs locked in boxes, about to be sold to dogfighters and backyard breeders, and I'm out of line? These dogs are government property undergoing lawful disposition. They're not property, they're soldiers. The disposition will proceed as scheduled. If you have concerns, you can file a formal complaint through the proper channels. Reeves stood up, his face going red the way bureaucrats' faces do when their authority is challenged in public. In the meantime, either register as a buyer or leave the premises. Reese looked at Reeves, looked at the 40 civilians circling the kennels like vultures, looked at Ghost, who had pressed his nose through the bars again and was watching her with eyes full of desperate hope. Garrett's last words over the radio, through static and gunfire and the sound of a world ending. "Get my dog home, Reese. Promise me." She had promised. Standing in a ready room 12,000 miles away, listening to the medevac pilot's voice break as he described injuries that were incompatible with life. She had promised a dying man that she would bring his dog home. And then the Navy had medically retired her, and the system had swallowed Ghost. And she'd spent 27 months trying to figure out how to be a person when the only thing she'd ever been good at was being a soldier. "Fine," Reese said quietly, the dangerous kind of quiet, the voice she'd used in the field when everything depended on the next 3 seconds. "Start your bidding." 10 minutes later, the auctioneer stepped onto a small platform and cleared his throat. He was a civilian contractor with a microphone and the enthusiasm of a man selling livestock. "All right, folks, welcome to the Fort Carson Surplus Working Dog Disposition event. We have 12 animals available today. All sales are final. Medical records are sealed per military protocol. Buyers assume full responsibility for—" "I have a question," Reese said. Her voice cut through the crowd like a rifle shot. The auctioneer paused. "Questions at the end, ma'am." "No. Now." Reese stepped forward. Havoc walked beside her, hackles up, that low growl building in his chest that meant he was reading the room and preparing for violence if it came. 40 faces turned to look at her. A woman in tactical pants and a black shirt, not tall, maybe 5'7", but carrying herself with the kind of presence that made people notice. Scars on her left forearm, a slight limp in her left leg, and eyes that had seen things most of these people couldn't imagine. "Why are the medical records sealed?" Reese asked. "Military protocol, ma'am." "There is no protocol that seals medical records during a disposition event. Buyers have a legal right to see the health history of any animal they're purchasing. So I'll ask again, why are they sealed?" The auctioneer looked at Reeves. Reeves shook his head slightly, a signal that said, "Shut this down." "Ma'am, if you'd like to discuss this privately—" "I'd like to discuss it right here, in front of everyone." Reese turned to the crowd. 40 faces staring back, some curious, some uncomfortable, some just wanting to buy a dog and go home. "These dogs served in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and Yemen," Reese said. "They detected explosives. They tracked terrorists. They shielded American service members with their own bodies. Some of them carry shrapnel in their hips. Some of them have hearing loss from flashbangs. Some of them watch their handlers die." Silence. Total silence. Even the dogs had gone still. And now they're being sold to the highest bidder without medical records, without transparency, and without any effort to return them to their handlers or place them in legitimate retirement programs. Reese paused. "Does anyone want to ask why?" The crowd shifted. Whispers rippled. The man in the leather vest who'd been checking dogs' teeth suddenly looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. "That's enough," Reeves said, stepping forward. "Captain Kincaid, you are disrupting a lawful military process. Stand down or I will have you escorted off the premises." "Who wants to start the bidding?" the auctioneer tried, his voice cracking. "Stop." One word. Reese's voice wasn't loud. It was something worse than loud. It was the voice of a person who had given commands in rooms where the wrong word got people killed. And every person in that yard felt it in their spine. Stop the auction. The auctioneer's hand froze above his clipboard. I will take all of them. Nobody moved. All 12 dogs. Every single one. Name your price. The auctioneer stared. Reeves stared. The entire crowd stared. That's not how this works, the auctioneer stammered. Individual animals are bid on individually. Then I'll bid on every one individually, starting now. Whatever the highest bid is, I'll double it. For all 12. You can't afford. Try me. Reeves stepped between Reese and the platform. His face had passed through red and arrived at something paler, something closer to fear. This is irregular. The disposition protocol requires individual placement assessments. The disposition protocol also requires transparent medical records and handler notification before retirement. You skip both. Reese held Reeves's gaze. So let's not talk about protocol. I'm denying your request. On what grounds? On the grounds that I am the commanding officer of this facility, and I said no. Every dog in the yard started barking. Not random panic noise. Coordinated, as if they understood, as if they were voting. Ajax threw his weight against the kennel bars. Scout stood up for the first time all day and pressed forward. Storm stopped his frantic pacing and added his voice. A deep, desperate bark that echoed off every surface. And Ghost lifted his head and joined them. His bark was weaker than the others, ragged from months of crying that no one heard. But it was there. The sound of a dog who had one last fight left in him. The crowd felt it. Every single person felt it. The woman with the clipboard lowered it. The man in the leather vest stepped back from the kennels. Even the auctioneer set down his microphone. You hear that? Reese said to Reeves. Quiet. Deadly. That's not barking. That's a plea. Every one of those dogs is begging you to do the right thing. And you're going to stand there and tell me no. Reeves swallowed. His eyes darted to the crowd. Phones were out now. Recording. This was no longer a quiet disposal event. This was a public stage. I'll file an official acquisition request, Reese said, through proper channels. But until that request is processed, this auction does not proceed. And if a single one of these dogs is sold, transferred, or harmed before my request is reviewed, I will personally ensure that every news outlet, every congressional office, and every veterans organization in this country knows exactly what happened here today. Reeves stared at her for a long time. The kind of stare that calculates costs and consequences and decides how much a career is worth versus how much a fight will cost. You're making a mistake, Captain. No, sir, I'm keeping a promise. Reeves turned and walked away without another word. The auctioneer looked around, confused, waiting for instructions that didn't come. The crowd buzzed with whispers. Reese walked back to Ghost's kennel and knelt down. The dog pressed his nose through the bars and touched her hand, and the trembling in Ghost's body eased just slightly, just enough, as if the dog understood that something had shifted, that someone had finally shown up. I'm going to get you out of here, Reese whispered. All of you, I promise. Havoc settled beside her. 2 dogs, one on each side of the bars. One free, one caged. And between them, a woman who had just declared war on the system that had betrayed them all. Reese's phone buzzed. Unknown number again, but this time not a text, a call. She answered. Captain Kincaid, a woman's voice, professional, controlled, but underneath the control something urgent. My name is Dr. Elena Bradford. I'm a military veterinarian. I was assigned to the MWD program at Fort Carson until 3 months ago, when I was transferred to a desk position at Norfolk for what they called administrative restructuring. Why are you calling me? Because I just watched what you did on a live stream someone is broadcasting from the disposition event, and I need you to know something. Elena paused. Those dogs didn't fail their behavioral assessments. I wrote those evaluations. Every single one of those dogs passed. Someone changed the results after I was reassigned. Reese's grip tightened on the phone. Who? I can't say for certain, but I can tell you that my transfer happened 2 weeks after I refused to sign off on a bulk retirement order for 23 dogs. An order that came directly from Commander Reeves's office. 23. There are only 12 here. Exactly, Elena's voice dropped, which means 11 dogs are already gone, sold, transferred, disappeared into a system that wasn't designed to track them. Reese closed her eyes. 11 dogs, gone into dogfights, into breeding mills, into the hands of people who saw weapons instead of warriors. There's more, Elena said. I kept copies of the original evaluations, and I have documents that show Reeves has been working with a private defense contractor called Aegis Global. They've signed a $40 million contract to supply replacement dogs to the military. But the contract only works if the current dogs are removed from service. They're forcing dogs out to make room for a private company's product and getting paid to do it. Reeves receives a consulting fee from Aegis Global, $200,000 a year. It's buried in the paperwork, but it's there. Elena paused. I have everything on a flash drive. Original evaluations, financial records, communications between Reeves and Aegis Global's CEO. But I need someone who's willing to use it, because the last person I tried to give this information to was transferred to a base in Guam within 48 hours. Where can we meet? There's a coffee shop off Route 17, the Grindhouse. Veteran-owned. I can be there in 2 hours. I'll be there in 90 minutes. Reese hung up and looked at Havoc. The dog was watching her with those amber eyes. Calm, steady, ready for whatever came next. The way he'd been for 6 years. The way he always would be. This just got a lot bigger than 12 dogs, buddy. Havoc's ears swiveled forward. His tail gave one slow wag. Not excitement, acknowledgement. The way a combat dog says, I'm with you, whatever it is, wherever it goes. Reese stood up, took one last look at Ghost, at the protruding ribs, at the matted fur of a dog that had once been the proudest, fiercest Malinois in the entire program. Garrett's dog, Garrett's partner, the last living connection to a man who had died saving everyone except himself. I will, Garrett, Reese whispered. I swear to God I will. She walked toward the gate. Behind her, 12 dogs watched her leave. Their barking had stopped. Their crying had stopped. They just watched, silent, still, with something new in their eyes that hadn't been there an hour ago. Hope. The fragile, terrified, desperate kind. The kind that hurts worse than despair because it means you've started believing again. And believing means you have something left to lose. Reese pushed through the gate and climbed into her truck. Hoppick jumped into the passenger seat and pressed his nose against the window, looking back at the facility. At the dogs still watching from their kennels. We're coming back for them, Reese said. Every single one. She started the engine and pulled onto the highway. The flash drive was waiting. Dr. Bradford was waiting. And somewhere inside a $40 million contract signed in blood and silence, the truth about what happened to those dogs and what happened to Garrett Thorne was waiting to be dragged into the light. Reese didn't know it yet, but the flash drive wouldn't just expose a corrupt officer selling dogs for profit. It would expose something far darker. Something that would rewrite everything she believed about her mentor's death. And once she saw it, there would be no going back. Havoc settled into the seat and rested his head on Reese's thigh. The way he always did on long drives. The way Garrett used to describe Ghost doing on the way back from missions. He just puts his head on my leg, Reese, like he's saying, good job, we survived another one. Garrett should have survived that last one too. Reese gripped the steering wheel and drove. 90 minutes to the Grindhouse. 90 minutes to learn exactly how deep the corruption went. 90 minutes before the war she just declared became something she couldn't walk away from, even if she wanted to. And she didn't want to. Not anymore. Not ever again. Dr. Elena Bradford was already sitting in the back booth when Reese walked in. She was younger than Reese had expected, mid-30s, lean with the kind of sharp eyes that came from years of looking at things other people missed. Her hands were wrapped around a coffee cup she hadn't touched, and she was watching the door with the controlled alertness of someone who'd been checking over her shoulder for weeks. The grindhouse was exactly what it sounded like. A veteran's coffee shop with mismatched furniture, walls covered in unit patches and faded photographs, and a hand-painted sign behind the counter that read, "Dogs welcome, idiots not." The owner, a retired Marine with a prosthetic leg and a 1,000-yard stare that softened when he saw havoc, nodded at Reese without comment. This was a place where working dogs were family, and questions weren't asked unless you wanted to answer them. Reese slid into the booth. Havoc settled under the table, nose pointed toward the door. Old habit, always watch the exits, always know who's coming. "Dr. Bradford, call me Elena. If we're going to do this, we don't have time for formalities." Elena reached into her bag and placed a flash drive on the table between them. Small, black, unremarkable. The kind of thing you could lose in a coat pocket and never think about again. Except this one contained evidence that would destroy careers and possibly end lives. "Everything is on there," Elena said. "Original behavioral evaluations for all 23 dogs that were flagged for forced retirement. My assessments show every single one of them passed. Clean, no aggression, no behavioral degradation, no medical disqualifiers. And after you were transferred, someone logged into the evaluation system using my credentials and changed the scores. 14 dogs went from fit for continued service to recommended for disposition in a single afternoon." Elena's jaw tightened. "They used my name, my login, my professional reputation. If those falsified reports ever go to court, it looks like I'm the one who failed them. That's why they transferred you, not to shut you up, to frame you. Took me 3 weeks to figure that out." Elena pushed the flash drive closer. "But I'm not the only one with evidence. There's a handler, Sloan Whitaker, former petty officer second class. She was discharged 8 months ago after filing a formal complaint about the treatment of retired MWDs at Fort Carson." Discharged for filing a complaint? Officially, she was discharged for failure to meet administrative requirements. Unofficially, she asked too many questions about where the retired dogs were going, and Reeves decided she was a problem. Elena paused. "She's been tracking the Aegis Global Connection on her own ever since, working at a civilian animal shelter, quietly pulling dogs out of the system when she can." "Where is she?" "Riverside Animal Rescue, about 40 minutes from here." Elena slid a piece of paper across the table. "She's expecting you. I called her while you were driving." Reese pocketed the address and picked up the flash drive. It felt heavier than it should have. Not because of the data, because of what the data meant. What it would cost to use it. What it would demand of everyone who touched it. "What about the 11 dogs that are already gone?" Reese asked. "The ones that were sold before today?" Elena's face changed. The professional composure cracked, and underneath it was something raw, something that had been eating at her for months. 3 of them were sold to a private security company in Texas that uses former military dogs as guard animals. No veterinary oversight, no welfare checks, just profit. "And the other 8? Elena didn't answer immediately. She looked down at her coffee, looked back up. Her eyes were wet. 2 were sold to a breeding operation in Georgia. Puppy mills, basically, using military bloodlines as a marketing tool. And the other 6? Her voice broke. "I don't know. The records were deleted. Whoever bought them paid cash, used false names, and the transaction files were wiped from the system within 24 hours. You think they went to fight rings? I've heard rumors. Dog fighting circuits in the Midwest have been advertising military-trained animals for the past 4 months. Dogs that are already conditioned for high-stress environments. Dogs that won't back down. Elena swallowed. Dogs that are already broken enough to be expendable. Reese felt something inside her go very cold. The kind of cold that doesn't come from temperature. It comes from understanding the full scope of what you're facing and realizing it's worse than you imagined. They're selling combat dogs to be tortured for entertainment. I spent 6 years as a military veterinarian. I put my hands on those dogs every day. I healed them. I cleared them for missions that could kill them. And now they're... She stopped, pressed her fingers against her eyes. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry, be angry. Elena looked up, met Reese's eyes, and something shifted in her expression. From grief to something harder, something focused. Who's behind Aegis Global? Reese asked. A man named Richard Kane, former defense contractor, made his fortune selling equipment to the military during the Iraq surge. Body armor, vehicle upgrades, communication systems. When those contracts dried up, he pivoted to military working dogs. Cheaper to produce, easier to sell, and the demand never goes away. And Reeves? Reeves is Kane's inside man. He controls the disposition process. He decides which dogs get retired, when they get retired, and where they go. In exchange, Aegis Global pays him a consulting fee, $200,000 a year, routed through a shell company called Patriot K9 Solutions. Reese's hands were flat on the table, perfectly still, but her knuckles were white. $200,000 to sell out dogs that saved American lives. That's the price, apparently. That's the price. Elena's voice hardened. But it gets worse. How does it get worse? Because Aegis Global doesn't just supply replacement dogs. They also supply intelligence packages for special operations. Field intelligence, targeting data, mission planning support. She paused. Including the intelligence package used for Operation Sandstorm in Yemen, 28 months ago. Reese's blood turned to ice. Garrett's mission. Lieutenant Commander Garrett Thorne's team received targeting data from Aegis Global through a classified intelligence sharing agreement. The data identified a compound in the Marib Governorate as a high-value target location. Entry points, guard positions, structural layouts, all provided by Aegis Global's field team. That intel was wrong. Reese's voice came out flat, mechanical, the way it did when she was processing information that her emotions couldn't afford to touch yet. The entry point was compromised. The compound layout was inaccurate. Garrett's team went through a door that should have been clear and walked into a kill zone. I know. Garrett took the blast, an IED inside the doorframe. He shielded Ghost with his body. Reese's hands were gripping the edge of the table now. He died on the medevac. His last words were about his dog. Elena didn't flinch, didn't look away, just held Reese's gaze with the steady attention of someone who understood that what came next would be the hardest thing either of them had ever said out loud. You're telling me the intelligence that killed my best friend came from the same company that's now selling his dog? I'm telling you that Aegis Global has a pattern. Bad intel that gets people killed. Dogs that get discarded when they're no longer profitable. And a system of corruption that reaches from a desk officer at Fort Carson all the way to defense contracts worth tens of millions. Elena held Reese's gaze. But I can't prove the intel was deliberately compromised. Not yet. That's why I need help. Havoc whined under the table. He could feel the change in Reese's body, the tension, the controlled rage, the particular stillness that came before action. The dog pressed harder against Reese's leg, grounding her the way he'd done 1,000 times in the field. Who else knows about this? Reese asked. A handler named Sloan Whitaker. She's been tracking Aegis Global for 14 months. And a senior dog handler at Fort Carson, Sergeant First Class Wade Brennan. He trained half the dogs on the disposition list. He knows they didn't fail their evaluations because he administered the field assessments himself. Why hasn't he said anything? Because Reeves threatened his pension. Brennan has 18 months until retirement, 20 years of service, a wife and 2 kids. Reeves told him that if he talked, his retirement benefits would disappear. Elena's voice softened slightly. So he watched them take the dogs and said nothing. He watched because he was afraid. Not everyone has the luxury of being fearless. I'm not fearless, I'm furious. There's a difference. Reese's phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost ignored it. Then something in her gut told her to answer. Captain Kincaid. A man's voice, smooth, polished. The voice of someone who hired people to do his talking and only picked up the phone when he wanted to make a point. My name is Richard Kane. I'm the CEO of Aegis Global Defense Solutions. Reese looked at Elena, mouthed the name. Elena's face went white. How did you get this number? I get every number I need, Captain. It's one of the benefits of working closely with the Department of Defense. Kane chuckled, the laugh of a man who found his own power amusing. I understand you made quite a scene at Fort Carson today. I found 12 military working dogs being sold off like scrap metal. I'd call that more than a scene. You'd call it whatever serves your narrative. I'd call it a lawful disposition process being disrupted by an emotional veteran who can't distinguish between policy and personal feelings. My personal feelings are that those dogs serve this country with more honor than you've ever had in your entire life. So skip the corporate talk and tell me why you're calling. Silence. 3 seconds. The kind of silence that meant recalculation. I'm calling because I respect what you did in the field, Captain. Your service record is impressive. 4 deployments, Silver Star, Purple Heart. A woman like you has options, a future. Kane paused. I'd hate to see you throw that away over a misunderstanding about some old dogs. A misunderstanding. Budget decisions are made every day in the military. Units are retired. Equipment is replaced. It's the natural cycle of defense operations. These dogs served well, and now they're being transitioned to civilian life. There's nothing sinister about it. Then why were the behavioral assessments falsified? Another silence, longer this time. I'm not aware of any falsified assessments. Dr. Elena Bradford wrote clean evaluations for every dog on that disposition list. Someone changed them using her credentials after she was forcibly transferred. I have the originals. Kane didn't respond for 5 seconds. When he did, the smooth polish was gone. What was underneath was harder, colder. Let me be direct with you, Captain. You have a dog, a nice retirement, a clean record. Walk away from this and all of that stays intact. I'll even make sure the dogs at Fort Carson are placed in reputable homes. Every single one, including Ghost. Ghost was my best friend's dog, Garrett Thorne, SEAL Team 7. He died in Yemen 28 months ago using intelligence provided by your company. Reese let the words land. So when you tell me to walk away, you're asking me to abandon the dog that my dead brother asked me to protect. Are you understanding the math here? I understand that grief makes people irrational, and I understand that $40 million makes people criminal. Reese stood up. Havoc stood with her. Here's what's going to happen, Mr. Kane. I'm going to get those dogs out of Fort Carson. I'm going to find the 11 that were already sold. And I'm going to make sure that every document, every falsified evaluation, every payment you've made to Commander Reeves ends up on the desk of someone who will use it to put you in a cell. You're making an enemy you can't afford. I've had enemies with RPGs and night vision. You're a businessman with a phone. I'll take my chances. Reese hung up. Elena was staring at her. He called you directly. He's scared. Same reason corrupt people always call directly. They want to assess the threat. Figure out if you can be bought or intimidated. Can you? My best friend died because of his company's intel. His dog is starving in a kennel because of his contract. There isn't a number big enough. Elena nodded. Something in her expression shifted from cautious ally to committed partner. Then let's go see Sloan. She has things you need to see. They drove to Riverside Animal Rescue in Reese's truck. Havoc rode shotgun, nose out the window, ears catching the wind with the pure, uncomplicated joy that only dogs are capable of, even in the middle of a crisis. Sloan Whitaker was waiting outside the shelter when they pulled up. 26 years old, short dark hair, strong hands. The kind of posture that said military even in civilian clothes. Shoulders back, chin up, eyes scanning. She wore a shelter volunteer shirt that was too big for her and jeans that had dog hair on them. And she looked at Reese's tactical pants and boots the way veterans look at other veterans when they recognize the uniform, even when it's not being worn. "You're the captain from the video," Sloan said, not a question. "What video?" "Someone at the disposition event live-streamed the whole thing. You telling Reeves to stop the auction, the dogs barking behind you, you saying you'd take all of them." Sloan held up her phone. "It's got 5 million views in 6 hours. Reese hadn't known, hadn't cared, but the number registered. 5 million people had watched her stand in front of those kennels and make a promise. Now she had to keep it in front of an audience. "Elena said you've been tracking Aegis Global for 14 months. Sloan led them inside the shelter. Dogs barked from kennels along the hallway. Civilian rescues, strays, surrenders. But in a separate room in the back, behind a locked door, 3 German shepherds lay on padded beds. Reese recognized them immediately. "These are MWDs. Atlas, Dakota, and Fury," Sloan said, kneeling beside the nearest dog. A shepherd with a graying muzzle and a scar across his shoulder. Atlas was sold at a disposition event 6 months ago. The buyer claimed to be a private security contractor. Turned out to be a front for a dogfighting operation in Virginia. "I tracked him down through a rescue network and bought him back." "How?" $500. Sloan's jaw tightened. That's what a decorated military working dog costs on the secondary market. $500 for an animal that spent 8 years protecting American soldiers. And the other 2? Dakota was found wandering a highway in North Carolina. No chip, no tags. Someone had removed them. Fury was surrendered to a rural shelter in Tennessee by a man who said the dog was too much trouble. Sloan stood up. 3 dogs I managed to save. Out of 11 that disappeared, 8 still missing, 8 that I can't find, 8 that might already be dead. Her voice was steady, but her eyes weren't. "And now there are 12 more at Fort Carson about to go through the same pipeline. Unless we stop it." Reese looked at the 3 dogs on the padded beds, looked at Havoc, who had walked up to Atlas and was touching noses with the old shepherd. The same way he'd touched noses with Ajax through the kennel bars. The language of dogs recognizing their own. "I need everything you have," Reese said. "Documents, photos, testimony, communication records, everything." Sloan went to a filing cabinet and pulled out a box. Thick, heavy. The kind of box that represented 14 months of obsession and rage organized into paper. Financial records linking Reeves to Aegis Global. Photographs of dogs I traced after disposition events. Sworn statements from 3 handlers whose dogs were taken without proper notification. She placed it on the table. "And this." Sloan pulled out a folder. Inside were photographs, not of dogs, of a building. An Aegis Global facility outside Norfolk. This is where they keep the replacement dogs before delivery to military installations. Younger animals, bred in private kennels, fast-tracked through basic training. Sloan pointed to one photograph. 3 weeks ago, I got close enough to see inside. The dogs are kept in conditions that violate every animal welfare standard the military has. Overcrowded, underfed, some with untreated injuries from training methods that any legitimate program would consider abuse. They're selling the military damaged dogs to replace healthy ones they forced into retirement at $40 million. And nobody knows because nobody's looking. The military gets new dogs. Aegis Global gets paid. Reeves gets his cut. And the dogs that actually served, the ones that bled and sacrificed, they disappear. Reese's phone rang. She checked the number, not unknown this time. A number she recognized. Wade Brennan. She answered. "Sergeant." Brennan's voice was low, strained. The voice of a man calling from a closet or a bathroom or anywhere he thought he couldn't be overheard. "Captain, I heard what you did at the disposition event. I need to talk to you." "I need to talk to you too, Wade." "Not on the phone. Meet me at my house tonight, 2100. Don't bring anyone military. I'm being watched." "By who?" "Reeves's people. Base security, maybe worse." Brennan's voice dropped even lower. "They came to my office an hour after you left Fort Carson. Told me that if anyone asks about the evaluations, I say they were conducted properly. Told me that if I deviate from that statement, I'll be investigated for misconduct and my retirement will be revoked. They're threatening you. They're threatening my family, my wife, my kids." They said it just like that. "Think about your family, Sergeant." Like it was a suggestion. Brennan's breathing was ragged. "I've kept my mouth shut for 6 months. Watched them take dogs I trained, dogs I loved. Watched them change my evaluations and put my name on lies. I've hated myself every single day for it. Then help me fix it. That's why I'm calling." A pause. Reese heard Brennan swallow hard. "I have something. Something I took from Reeves's office 3 months ago. Something he doesn't know I have." "What is it?" "A communication log. Encrypted emails between Reeves and Kane dating back 2 years. I couldn't read most of them. They're coded. But there's one chain that isn't. One chain where they discuss Operation Sandstorm, where they discuss the intelligence package they provided for the Yemen raid." Reese stopped breathing. "Wade, what does it say?" "It says they knew the intel was compromised. They knew the entry point was wrong. They knew the compound layout had changed 3 days before the operation." Brennan's voice cracked. "And they sent your team in anyway, because pulling the intel package would have triggered a review that would have exposed the entire dog replacement scheme." The room went silent. Sloan and Elena were both watching Reese's face, and whatever they saw there made them go perfectly still. "They knew," Reese said. The words came out quiet, almost inaudible. "They knew Garrett was walking into a trap. Captain, I'm sorry. They didn't just let him die. They sent him in knowing he wouldn't come out. They murdered a Navy SEAL to protect a contract. That's what the emails say. And Ghost. Garrett shielded Ghost from the blast, saved the dog's life with his own body. And then they took that dog and put him in a cage and tried to sell him." Reese's voice didn't rise. It dropped. Into the register where words stop being communication and start being weapons. "Garrett died for his dog, and they sold his dog for scrap. I know. That's why I can't stay quiet anymore. I don't care about my pension. I don't care about my career. What they did to those dogs, what they did to Commander Thorne." Brennan's voice steadied. "I'll testify. Whatever you need, wherever you need me. I'm done being afraid. 2100, your house. I'll be there. Captain, be careful. If Kane finds out what I have, he won't just threaten. The man has private security, ex-military, the kind of people who make problems disappear. I've been a problem my whole career, Wade. Nobody's made me disappear yet." Reese hung up. Elena and Sloan were both staring at her. Havoc was pressed against her leg, whining softly, feeling the earthquake inside his handler's body. "Reese," Elena said carefully, "what did Brennan say?" Reese looked at her, looked at Sloan, looked at the 3 rescued dogs lying on their beds, trusting the humans around them because that's what dogs do. They trust, even when every experience tells them they shouldn't. Garrett Thorne didn't die in combat. Each word fell like a stone into still water. He was murdered. Aegis Global knew the intel was compromised. They sent his team into a kill zone because pulling the intelligence package would have exposed their corruption. Sloane's hand went to her mouth. Elena closed her eyes. "My best friend was assassinated to protect a $40 million dog contract." Reese's voice was steady now, not calm, the opposite of calm. The kind of steady that happens when fury burns so hot it turns everything else to ash, and what's left is pure, crystallized purpose. And the dog he died to save is sitting in a kennel at Fort Carson with his ribs showing, waiting to be sold to a stranger. "What do you want to do?" Sloan asked. "I want to burn them down. Reeves, Kane, every person who signed off on this, every person who knew and said nothing." Reese looked at Havoc. The dog looked back with amber eyes that held no judgment, no agenda, no calculation, just loyalty, pure, unbreakable, the kind that humans talk about but dogs actually live. But the dogs come first. They always come first. She picked up the flash drive from the table, picked up Sloane's box of evidence, picked up her phone and started composing a message to a number she hadn't used in 3 years. Before she could send it, she made one more call, a number she hadn't dialed in almost as long. "Morrison." The voice was gruff, familiar. Colonel James Hawk Morrison, 66 years old, retired Marine. The man who trained Reese in Afghanistan when she was a lieutenant and the entire program was betting against her. "Hawk, it's Kincaid." A pause, then a low chuckle. "Saw your video, Captain. 10 million views. You always did know how to make an entrance. I need advice, off the record." "I'm listening," Reese told him. All of it. The emails, the sandstorm connection, the plan to extract 12 dogs before dawn. When she finished, Hawk was quiet for 10 seconds. "You're walking into a shitstorm, Kincaid. I know, and you're doing it anyway. I don't have a choice. These are Garrett's dogs, my dogs. They're not dying in cages while I file paperwork." Another pause. "What do you need from me?" "Nothing. I needed to tell someone who'd understand." "I understand. And when this is over, when you've got those dogs and the bastards who sold them are in cells, you call me, because you're going to need help building something permanent, something that makes sure this never happens again." Reese felt something ease in her chest. "You offering?" "I'm retired, Kincaid. Got nothing but time and a pension I don't know what to do with. Put me to work." "I will, thank you, Hawk." "Don't thank me yet. You survive the next 12 hours first." He hung up. Reese looked at Elena and Sloan. "I need both of you tonight at Brennan's house, 2100. "I'll be there," Elena said. "Me too," Sloan said. Reese nodded, looked down at Havoc. The dog's tail gave one slow, deliberate wag. "Let's go get those emails, boy. And then let's go get our dogs." Havoc stood up, pressed his head against Reese's hand, the way he did before every mission, the way he'd always done. The gesture that said, "I don't know what's coming, but I know I'm going with you." And that's enough. Reese walked out of the shelter with evidence in her hands and murder in her heart. And 12 dogs waiting in kennels for a woman who had just learned that keeping her promise was going to cost more than she'd ever imagined. And she was going to pay it anyway. Every last cent. Brennan's hands were shaking when he opened the door. Not the kind of shaking that comes from cold or caffeine. The kind that comes from a man who has spent 6 months swallowing poison and has finally decided to spit it out, knowing it might kill him either way. "Get inside, all of you, fast." Reese went first, Havoc next, then Sloan and Elena, moving quickly, silently, the way people move when they understand the stakes have passed beyond careers and entered the territory of survival. Brennan locked the door, checked the window, pulled the blinds shut with the precise, mechanical movements of a man running on adrenaline and terror in equal measure. "Where's your family?" Reese asked. "Sent them to my sisters in Richmond this morning. Told my wife it was a surprise visit." Brennan's jaw worked. "She doesn't know about any of this, about the dogs, about what Reeves has been doing. I couldn't tell her I've been a coward for 6 months." "You're not a coward, Wade. You were protecting your family." "I was protecting myself." Brennan met Reese's eyes, and the self-loathing in them was so raw it made the air heavier. I watched them change the evaluations on my computer, watch them reclassify dogs I'd trained for years as aggressive, as unfit, as surplus, dogs that would have run through fire for me. And I sat there and let someone stamp defective on their records because I was afraid of losing my pension. "You're here now," Sloan said quietly. "That's what matters." Brennan stared at her for a long moment. Then he went to a closet in the hallway and pulled out a lockbox. Combination lock. His fingers fumbled twice before getting it open. Inside was a laptop, old, military issue, the kind that looked like it had survived a deployment because it had. 3 months ago, Reeves left his office unlocked during a fire drill. 90 seconds. That's all I had. Brennan set the laptop on the kitchen table. I plugged in a USB and copied everything I could grab. Didn't even look at what I was getting, just copied and ran. And Reeves doesn't know? If Reeves knew, I'd be in a cell right now, or worse. Brennan opened the laptop. Most of what he'd grabbed was encrypted. Financial records, personnel files, communication logs, all locked behind passwords he couldn't crack. But there was one folder that wasn't encrypted, one chain of emails that Reeves had either forgotten to protect or didn't think anyone would ever see. He turned the screen toward Reese. The email chain was between two addresses, one internal military, one private. The internal address belonged to Reeves. The private address was registered to a domain called patriotk9.net, Kane's shell company. Reese read the first email, dated 26 months ago. Phase 2 proceeding. Retirement orders for Unit Group 7 processed. Behavioral modifications applied to evaluation records per our agreement. Disposition scheduled for Q3. Venue allocation as discussed. Revenue allocation. They were talking about living, breathing animals, dogs that had served in combat, like quarterly earnings. The second email, dated 23 months ago. Concerns raised by veterinary officer evaluation discrepancies. Recommend reassignment to non-critical post, Norfolk suggested. Handle quietly. That was Elena, her career, her reputation, her life's work. Handle quietly, in 6 words. Then Reese reached the third email chain, dated 30 months ago, 2 months before Garrett died. Her hand stopped on the trackpad. "Read it," Brennan said quietly. "You need to see all of it." The email from Kane to Reeves. Intel package for Sandstorm compiled from secondary sources. Primary verification incomplete. Field team reports potential structural changes to target compound, but confirmation timeline exceeds operational window. Recommend proceeding with existing data. Delay risks exposure of Program Vanguard. Program Vanguard, Elena said, reading over Reese's shoulder. That's what they called it internally, the dog replacement scheme. I saw the name in budget documents before I was transferred. Reeves's reply, understood. Forwarding to JSOC as verified. Will flag as high confidence. Reese read it again, and a third time, because her mind refused to accept what her eyes were showing her. High confidence, she said. The words tasted like ash. Reeves flagged unverified intelligence as high confidence. He sent my team into a compound using targeting data that his own contractor admitted was incomplete, because verifying the intel would have delayed the operation. And a delay would have triggered a review of the intelligence source, Elena said, which would have exposed Program Vanguard, the dog replacement scheme. They chose a contract over Garrett's life. They chose money over all our lives. Elena's voice was barely a whisper. Your entire team walked into that compound based on a lie. Reese pushed back from the table, stood up, walked 3 steps toward the wall, and stopped because there was nowhere to go. Nowhere in the world she could walk to that would make this not be true. Garrett laughing in the ready room before the mission brief, checking Ghost's harness with the obsessive care of a handler who loved his dog more than sleep, saying, "Let's go get him, Reese," the way he always did before they stepped off. Like it was a game, like they were invincible, Like dying was something that happened to other people. Garrett hadn't died in combat. He'd been sacrificed on an accountant's spreadsheet. Havoc pressed against Reese's leg, hard. The dog could feel the seismic shift happening inside his handler, the grief restructuring itself into something darker, something sharper, something that would either save them all or consume them. Reese, Sloane's voice, careful, the way you talk to someone standing on an edge. We can use this. This is the evidence that changes everything, but only if we move now, before Kane finds out what Brennan has. She's right, Elena said. These emails prove foreknowledge, prove that Reeves submitted falsified intelligence to a joint special operations command. That's not corruption. That's a war crime. Who do we take it to? Brennan asked. The chain of command is compromised. Reeves has allies at Fort Carson. The base commander signed off on the disposition events without questioning them. If we go through military channels, we don't go through military channels, Reese said, turning around. Her face had changed. The grief was still there, but it had been packed down beneath something harder, something operational. The face of a person who had just identified her target. We go to NCIS. She pulled out her phone, called the number. 3 rings. Mercer. Captain, it's Reese Kincaid. A pause. The particular pause of someone who hasn't heard a name in years, but recognizes it instantly. Kincaid. I saw the video from Fort Carson. 10 million views now, by the way. You're trending on every veterans page on the internet. I don't care about views. I care about 12 dogs in kennels and a dead SEAL who deserves justice. Garrett Thorne. You know about him? I know Aegis Global provided the intelligence for Operation Sandstorm. I know the intel was flagged as high confidence when it shouldn't have been. And I know that someone in the disposition chain at Fort Carson has been working with Kane to force out military working dogs and replace them with Aegis Global stock. Mercer's voice tightened. What I don't have is proof, hard documentation that connects the dots. I have it. Silence. The kind that means someone has stopped breathing. What do you have, Kincaid? Encrypted emails between Reeves and Kane discussing the falsification of the Sandstorm intelligence package. Original behavioral evaluations proving the dogs didn't fail their assessments. Financial records linking Reeves to a $200,000 annual payment through a shell company. Testimony from the senior handler who watched the evaluations being changed, and a military veterinarian who was forcibly transferred for refusing to sign fraudulent retirement orders. Mercer was quiet for 5 full seconds. Reese could hear her thinking, weighing the evidence against the risk, calculating the operational requirements, deciding whether this was real or another dead end in a 2-year investigation that had produced nothing but frustration. Where are you? Off base, secure location. Stay there. I'll mobilize a team. We can be at Fort Carson by dawn. Mercer paused. But Kincaid, I need something more. The emails and evaluations will support charges against Reeves, maybe even Kane. But to prove that the Sandstorm intel was deliberately compromised, to prove that Thorne's death wasn't a tragic intelligence failure, but a calculated decision, I need someone on the inside to confirm the chain of custody. Wade Brennan, Sergeant First Class. He's with me now. He's willing to testify. Is he reliable? Reese looked at Brennan. The man's hands had stopped shaking. Something had settled behind his eyes. The look of a man who had finally made the decision he should have made 6 months ago and was ready to live with whatever it cost. He's terrified, and he showed up anyway. In my experience, that's the most reliable kind of person there is. All right, I'm moving. 6 hours. Keep everyone safe until then. Mercer hesitated. And Kincaid, the dogs at Fort Carson. If Reeves gets wind of this investigation before we move, he'll have them transferred. Gone. You understand what that means? Destroyed, or worse, sold into the same pipeline that already swallowed 11 others. Mercer's voice hardened. Can you secure them? I have a plan. Is it legal? 3 seconds of silence. Mostly, Kincaid, do you want those dogs alive when my team arrives? Or do you want to be legally compliant and have them dead? Keep them alive. I'll deal with the paperwork. Good answer, she hung up. Reese looked at the 3 people in the room. Elena, the veterinarian who had refused to sign fraudulent orders and lost her career for it. Sloan, the handler who had been discharged for asking the wrong questions and had spent 14 months building a case on her own. Brennan, the trainer who had watched in silence for 6 months and was now standing up because a woman with a dog had walked into an auction and reminded him what courage looked like. Here's what's going to happen, Reese said. We have 6 hours before Mercer's team arrives at Fort Carson. In that window, we need to extract 12 dogs from the disposition center before Reeves can move them. Extract? Brennan's eyes widened. You want to break into a military facility and take... I want to enter a military facility using legitimate veterinary authorization and remove animals whose welfare is at immediate risk. Reese looked at Elena. You're still a commissioned military veterinarian. Your credentials are still active. I was reassigned, not discharged. Technically, yes, my clinical authority extends to any military working dog in distress. I can issue an emergency welfare hold. It's a medical directive that overrides disposition orders when an animal's health is in immediate danger. Will it hold up? If anyone challenges it, the burden is on them to prove the dogs aren't in danger. And given the condition I saw them in from the live stream, Elena's mouth tightened. Malnourished, stressed, at least 2 showing signs of acute anxiety disorder. I can document enough to justify an emergency removal. Brennan, you have base access? Until 0600 when my regular shift starts. After that, my movements get logged. Then we go before 0600. Reese turned to Sloan. I need your shelter as a temporary holding facility. 12 dogs, minimum 48 hours until NCIS can secure them as evidence. The shelter can handle it. I've been preparing for something like this since I started. Sloan paused. But Reese, what about the 11 dogs that are already gone? Atlas, Dakota, and Fury are safe at my shelter, but 8 are still missing. One problem at a time. Tonight we save the 12 we can reach. Tomorrow we find the 8 we can't. Reese looked at each of them. Anyone want to walk away? This is the last chance. After tonight, there's no going back. Nobody moved. Good. Reese knelt beside Havoc. The dog looked up at her with those amber eyes. Steady, unwavering. The eyes of a partner who had never once hesitated when it mattered. One more mission, buddy. Havoc's tail wagged once. Slow, deliberate. The wag that meant always. They moved at 0300. Brennan drove them through the back gate of Fort Carson using his security credentials. No alarms, no additional scrutiny. The guards barely glanced at the military vehicle. Just another late shift movement on a base that never fully slept. The disposition center was dark, locked. But Brennan had the access codes, the same codes he'd used every day for 20 years. The moment the door opened, the dogs reacted. Not with barking, not with the frantic, desperate cries from that afternoon. With something quieter, something that Reese felt in her chest before she heard it. A collective exhalation. The sound of 12 animals who had been holding their breath since she'd walked away that morning. Waiting, hoping, refusing to believe it was over. Havoc went in first, working the room the way he always did. Methodical, thorough, checking each kennel, touching noses through the bars. And behind him, each dog rose. Each dog pressed forward. Each dog said with their eyes and their whines and the push of their noses against the metal, "You came back. You actually came back." Reese went to Ghost Kennel first. The dog was standing this time, thin, trembling, but standing. And when Reese knelt in front of the bars, Ghost pressed his entire body against the door with a force that made the metal sing. "I told you I was coming back," Reese said, her voice rough. I don't break promises, buddy. Not to Garrett, not to you. Elena moved through the facility with clinical precision, documenting each dog's condition on her tablet. Weight loss, stress indicators, dehydration, untreated pressure sores from lying on concrete. She photographed everything. Evidence that would support both the emergency welfare hold and the criminal case. These dogs haven't been properly fed in at least a week, Elena said, her voice tight with controlled fury. Ajax has lost 12 pounds since his last recorded weight. Storm is showing signs of acute stress collapse. And Ghost, she stopped in front of his kennel. Ghost has a wound on his right hip that hasn't been treated. It's infected. Shrapnel scar, Reese said, from Yemen. It was healing fine when he was with his handler. Someone stopped treating it. Someone stopped caring. Elena signed the emergency welfare directive on her tablet. 12 dogs. Immediate removal authorized under Military Veterinary Code. My name, my credentials, my authority. Brennan unlocked the first kennel. Ajax stepped out. Cautious at first, then faster, pressing his massive body against Brennan's legs with a force that nearly knocked the man backward. Easy, big guy, Brennan said, his voice breaking. I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. Ajax didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. He pressed harder, forgiving everything with the simple pressure of his body against the man who had once been his trainer, his protector, his person. One by one, the kennels opened. Scouts stepped out and immediately went to havoc. The two dogs circling each other in the ancient ritual of warriors recognizing equals. Storm emerged, trembling, legs unsteady, and Sloane caught him, guided him gently, supported his weight, whispered calm words into his flattened ears until the shaking eased. Reese opened Ghost's kennel last. The dog didn't rush out. He stepped forward slowly, with the careful deliberation of an animal that had been tricked before and couldn't survive being tricked again. One paw, then another, until he was standing in front of Reese, nose to knee, looking up with eyes that carried 28 months of grief. Hey, Reese knelt. You're free, buddy. For real this time. Ghost pressed his face into Reese's chest, the same place Garrett used to hold him after missions. The same warmth, different heartbeat, but close enough. Close enough to mean, I'm not alone anymore. Reese wrapped her arms around the dog and held him, felt the protruding ribs, felt the trembling, felt the infected wound on his hip that nobody had bothered to treat because nobody had bothered to care. I've got you, Reese whispered. Garrett sent me, and I'm not going anywhere. They loaded the dogs into the transport vehicle, 12 shepherds plus Havoc, packed into a van that Brennan had signed out under a training exercise authorization. It was tight. It was chaotic. It was 13 military dogs and 4 humans in a space designed for maybe half that number. It was also the most beautiful thing Reese had ever been part of. Sloane drove. Brennan rode shotgun. Elena sat in the back, monitoring the dogs, checking vitals, keeping the ones with anxiety close to the calm ones. Reese sat on the floor of the van, with Ghost on one side and Havoc on the other. Her 2 dogs, one she'd saved 6 years ago, and one she was saving tonight, bookending her like sentries guarding the most important thing they'd ever been asked to protect. They were 3 miles from the base gate when Brennan's phone rang. He answered, listened for 10 seconds. His face went gray. That was my buddy in the security office. Reeves just arrived at base, 0300 in the morning, and he's walking into the disposition center. He knows, Reese said. He'll find the empty kennels in about 4 minutes. Then we have 4 minutes to get off this base. Sloane didn't need to be told twice. The van surged forward, engine whining. 13 dogs bracing against the sudden acceleration with the instinctive balance of animals who had ridden in military vehicles their entire lives. 2 minutes to the gate. Brennan's phone rang again. He looked at the screen, his breath caught. It's Reeves. Don't answer. If I don't, he'll know I'm involved. He already knows. The only question is whether we're through the gate before he locks it down. The gate appeared ahead. One guard, one barrier. Standard overnight security. Minimal staffing. Minimal scrutiny. Sloan pulled up to the checkpoint, smiled at the guard, handed over Brennan's authorization form. The guard looked at the form, looked at the van, looked at the 13 dogs visible through the rear windows. Training exercise? He raised an eyebrow. Late night detection drill, Brennan said from the passenger seat. New protocol, you know how it is. The guard studied the form for 3 more seconds. Behind them, in the distance, Reese heard a sound that made her skin prickle. The wail of a base security siren. Faint, but growing. The guard heard it too. Looked up, looked at Brennan, looked at the form. Go ahead. He raised the barrier. Sloan floored it. The van shot through the gate and onto the highway, and behind them the siren grew louder. Lights began flashing across the base, and the sound of a system waking up to discover it had been beaten echoed into the dark. Reese looked through the rear window, watched the base lights shrink in the distance, felt Ghost pressed against her leg, and Havoc pressed against her other leg, and 12 dogs breathing around her in a space that smelled like fear and freedom and the beginning of something that couldn't be stopped. Her phone buzzed. A text from Reeves. You just ended your career, Kincaid. Every dog in that vehicle is stolen government property. You will be arrested, court-martialed, and prosecuted. When I'm done, you will spend the rest of your life in Leavenworth. Reese typed back 3 words. Come and try. Then she called Mercer. Captain, timeline just changed. We extracted the dogs. Reeves knows. I need your team at Fort Carson now. Not dawn. Now. You were supposed to wait. The dogs would have been gone by dawn. Reeves was already moving. 5 seconds of silence. Then Mercer's voice. Hard. Sharp. I'm redirecting my team. 2 hours. Hold what you have and don't let anyone near those dogs. Not a soul. Understood. And Kincaid, the emails from Brennan's laptop, send them to me now. All of them. If Reeves tries to frame this as theft, I need the evidence in my hands before his lawyers start spinning. Sending now. Mercer paused. One more thing. Garrett Thorne's mother, Maggie, she lives in Virginia Beach. When this goes public, when they find out the truth, they deserve to hear it from someone who loved him, not from a news report. Reese closed her eyes, felt Ghost's warmth against her leg, felt the weight of a promise that kept getting heavier and more sacred with every hour that passed. I'll tell her myself. Good. 2 hours, Kincaid. Keep those dogs alive. She hung up. Sloan drove through the darkness toward the shelter. Beside Reese, Ghost shifted and rested his head on her thigh. The exact gesture Garrett had described 100 times. The dog's way of saying, we made it. We survived another one. Reese put her hand on Ghost's head and felt the dog exhale. Long, slow. The breath of an animal releasing something it had been carrying for 28 months. Almost there, buddy, Reese whispered. Almost home. 12 dogs in a van on a dark highway. 4 humans who had risked everything to save them. And behind them, an empire of corruption waking up to discover that the woman they'd tried to silence had just stolen their leverage, exposed their crime, and set a countdown that no amount of money or power or threats could stop. 2 hours until NCIS arrived. 2 hours until the truth that killed Garrett Thorne became the weapon that would destroy the people who murdered him. And in the back of a crowded van, surrounded by warriors who walked on 4 legs, Reese Kincaid held her best friend's dog and made one final promise. Not to Garrett, not to Mercer, not to anyone who could hear her, to herself. No more silence, no more looking away, no more letting systems built on greed decide which heroes live and which ones die. Not on her watch, not ever again. Part 3. The Reckoning. Sloan backed the van into the shelter's loading bay at 0547. The dogs knew before anyone opened the doors, before anyone said a word. 12 noses pressed against the van's windows. 12 bodies shifted from tense to alert, and the collective energy inside the vehicle changed from fear to something Reese could only describe as cautious recognition. The smell of other dogs, the smell of safety, the smell of a place that wasn't a cage. "Easy," Reese murmured. "We're here. Everyone stays calm." She opened the rear doors. Havoc jumped out first. First. Always clearing the ground for his handler, even when the ground was a parking lot at a civilian animal shelter, and the only threat was the raccoon that lived behind the dumpster. One by one, the dogs came out. Ajax stepped down heavily, his massive frame still carrying the exhaustion of months of confinement. But his head was up, his tail was moving. Not wagging, not yet, but moving. A dog deciding whether it was safe to feel something again. Scout came next, nose working overtime, cataloging every new scent with the methodical precision of a detection dog who couldn't turn it off. Even when the mission was over, even when there were no more missions, Storm had to be carried. Sloan lifted him out of the van and set him on his feet, and he stood there trembling until Ajax pressed against his side, and the trembling eased, the pack taking care of its own. Ghost was last. Reese didn't rush him. She sat in the open doorway of the van and waited while Ghost gathered whatever was left of his courage and forced his thin, weak body to move. The dog stepped down one paw at a time, nose testing the air, eyes scanning for threats that existed only in the memory of an animal who had learned the hard way that new places could mean new cages. "You're safe," Reese said. "I promise." Ghost pressed against her legs and stayed there. Sloan had prepared the shelter's back wing, the section reserved for long-term rehabilitation cases. 15 kennels with padded bedding, fresh water, food bowls already filled. She'd called in 2 volunteers she trusted absolutely. Davis, a retired Marine who fostered rescue dogs, and Anna, a vet tech who worked overnight shifts and never asked questions she didn't need answers to. 12 dogs, Davis said, looking at the procession filing through the back door. He let out a low whistle. "Sloan, when you said you needed help tonight, I thought you meant with a litter of puppies. These are military working dogs. They've been forcibly retired and were about to be sold off at a disposition auction." Sloan guided Storm to the nearest kennel. "They need food, water, and quiet, and they need to not exist on any records until NCIS arrives." Davis looked at Reese, looked at the tactical pants and boots, looked at the 13 German shepherds filing past him with the disciplined calm of animals who had trained their entire lives to follow commands, even when the world was falling apart. "Copy that," Davis said. "No further questions." A Marine knew when the mission was bigger than the briefing. Elena started triage immediately, checking each dog, documenting injuries, starting hydration protocols for the ones showing signs of dehydration. She moved through the kennels with the quiet efficiency of a doctor who had spent years learning to separate her emotions from her hands, even when both wanted to break. Ajax needs joint supplements and rest. His hips are degraded from untreated strain. Scout has a dental infection that's been festering for weeks. Storm, Elena stopped in front of his kennel, and for the first time since Reese had met her, Elena Bradford's composure cracked all the way through. "Storm has stress-induced cardiomyopathy. His heart is enlarged. He's been in a state of sustained panic for so long that it's physically damaged his cardiac tissue. Can you treat it? I can stabilize him, but he needs a veterinary cardiologist and a calm environment and time." Elena's voice shook. "He needs time he might not have, Reese, because someone left a dog with a damaged heart in a metal cage and forgot about him." "They didn't forget," Reese said, her voice flat. "They chose." Elena moved to Ghost's kennel, knelt down, examined the infected wound on the dog's hip with gentle hands that knew exactly how much pressure an injury could take before it caused more pain. This shrapnel injury was healing fine under proper care. Someone stopped treating it, Deliberately or through neglect, the result is the same. It's infected now. He needs surgery. Soon. How soon? Within 48 hours, or the infection will spread to the bone. And if it reaches the bone, Elena didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Reese's phone rang. Mercer. Kincaid, my team is airborne. ETA Fort Carson 0600, but we have a complication. What kind? Reeves filed a theft report with base security 20 minutes ago. 12 military working dogs stolen from the disposition center by Captain Reese Kincaid and Sergeant First Class Wade Brennan. He's named you both. Name the dogs by service number, and he's requesting civilian law enforcement assistance to recover what he's calling government property. He's trying to get the local police to find us before NCIS arrives. That's exactly what he's doing. And legally, until my team serves the warrant and takes jurisdiction, a local police department that receives a theft report from a military installation has probable cause to search and seize. How long until your warrant is active? My JAG officer is drafting it now. 2 hours. Maybe 3. We might not have 3 hours. Then don't be where the police expect you to be. Mercer paused. And Kincaid, protect the evidence. The laptop, the flash drive, the veterinary documentation. If Reeves's lawyers can claim the evidence was obtained improperly or tampered with, they'll move to suppress everything. Understood. One more thing. Richard Kane. We've been monitoring his communications since you forwarded the emails. 30 minutes ago, he chartered a private jet from Norfolk International to Grand Cayman. He's running. Can you stop him? We've flagged his passport. TSA is aware. But Kane has resources, private security, alternate documentation, contacts in 3 countries without extradition treaties. Mercer's voice hardened. If he gets on that plane, we lose him. And if we lose him, the murder charge dies with him. We can still get Reeves for corruption and fraud, but the sandstorm evidence, the proof that Garrett was set up, that's all on Kane. He's the one who made the call. He's the one who sent the email. Reese felt the ground shift under her feet. The entire case, Garrett's justice, the dog's freedom, everything they'd risked. All of it balanced on whether a rich man with a private jet could be stopped before he reached international airspace. Keep me updated every 30 minutes. Stay safe, Kincaid. Mercer hung up. Brennan was pacing the shelter's back room. Phone in his hand, face the color of old concrete. My wife called. Someone went to my sister's house in Richmond. 2 men in suits. They told my sister they were from military personnel and needed to speak with me about a security matter. Brennan's voice was tight. My wife is terrified. My kids are asking why strangers are at the door. Kane's people, Reese said. Private security. They're trying to find you before you can testify. They found my family. Brennan stopped pacing. The fear in his eyes had been replaced by something older, something harder, the particular fury of a man whose children have been threatened. I spent 6 months being a coward to protect them, and they went after them anyway. Call your wife. Tell her to take the kids and go to a hotel. Different name. Cash only. Don't use credit cards. Don't call anyone she knows. Reese gripped Brennan's shoulder. Your family will be safe. Mercer will have protection on them within the hour. And if she can't, then I will. Reese held his gaze. I lost my best friend because I couldn't protect him. I'm not losing anyone else. Not tonight. Brennan nodded, pulled out his phone, walked to the corner of the room and called his wife. And Reese heard the words come out. Baby, listen to me. Take the kids. Leave now. I'll explain everything. In the voice of a man who had finally crossed the line from bystander to combatant and was discovering that the other side was scarier and clearer and more alive than anything he'd felt in years. Sloan found Reese in the kennel room, sitting on the floor between Ghost and Havoc. Both dogs were pressed against her. Ghost's breathing had evened out. Not calm exactly, but steadier. The steadiness of an animal that had found something solid to lean against. There's something you need to see. Sloan knelt beside her and held out her phone. The video from the disposition event. The one where Reese had stopped the auction. It had hit 15 million views 2 hours ago. Sloan scrolled through the comments. That's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Someone give that woman every dog in America. I'm a retired canine handler. I'm crying. Where are those dogs now? How do we help? This is what a real hero looks like. And then, deeper in the comments, something that made Reese stop scrolling. I'm Maggie Thorne. My son Garrett died 28 months ago in Yemen. His dog, Ghost, was supposed to be protected. If anyone knows where Ghost is, please contact me. I've been trying to find him since Garrett died. No one at the military will return my calls. Reese stared at the comment, read it again, a third time. Garrett's mother, searching for her dead son's dog, begging strangers on the internet for help because the military, the same military her son had died serving, wouldn't answer the phone. She doesn't know, Reese said. Doesn't know what? She doesn't know where Ghost is. She doesn't know what they've been doing. And she definitely doesn't know that her son was murdered. Are you going to tell her? I have to. The words came out heavy. Mercer said Garrett's parents deserve to hear it from someone who was there, not from a news report. Sloan sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. When? After NCIS moves, after Reeves is in custody, after the evidence is secured. Reese paused. I owe her that conversation, face to face, not over a phone, not in a comment section. She lives in Virginia Beach. That's where Ghost needs surgery. I know. Reese looked at Ghost. The dog looked back with those deep brown eyes that had watched Garrett die, eyes that had waited 28 months for someone to bring him back to this woman, this mother, this connection to everything he'd lost. 2 birds, 1 trip. The sun was coming up when Mercer called again. We got Kane. Reese was outside with Havoc, watching the dogs in the shelter's outdoor run. Ajax was leading the pack in slow circles. Scout was lying in the grass, nose still working even in rest. Storm was moving carefully, but he was moving. And Ghost was standing near the fence, looking at Reese through the chain link with an expression that was starting to look less like fear and more like trust. Tell me, Reese said. FBI intercepted him at the charter terminal. He was 20 feet from the plane when they grabbed him. Had 3 passports, $200,000 in cash, and a hard drive that his lawyers are already trying to claim is protected by attorney-client privilege. Is it? Not when it contains evidence of conspiracy to commit murder. The satisfaction in Mercer's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. He's in federal custody, not bail eligible, flight risk. Reese closed her eyes, felt the information settle into her body like a long-awaited breath settling into tired lungs. What about Reeves? My team just served the warrant at Fort Carson. Reeves was still at his office, 0500 in the morning, sitting at his desk on the phone with his lawyer, trying to get ahead of the theft report. Mercer paused. He's in handcuffs now. Did he say anything? Made a statement when we cuffed him. Said he was following orders. Said the disposition program was approved at levels above his pay grade. Said, and I'm quoting, "You're making a mistake. I'm the small fish. The people above me will bury this before it ever sees a courtroom." Is he right about being a small fish? Maybe. About burying it, Mercer's voice went steel cold. Not a chance. I've waited 2 years for this. The evidence you and your team provided isn't just sufficient for prosecution, it's devastating. Financial records, falsified evaluations, communication logs proving foreknowledge of compromised intelligence, testimony from a senior handler, medical documentation from a military veterinarian. She paused. And the Sandstorm emails, the ones that prove Kane and Reeves knowingly set a SEAL team into a kill zone to protect a $40 million contract. That's not corruption, Kincaid. That's murder. What about the dogs, the ones that were already sold, the 11 that disappeared into the pipeline? We're working on it. 3 are safe at Sloan's shelter: Atlas, Dakota, and Fury. 2 more were traced to the private security company in Texas. My team is coordinating with local authorities to seize them. Mercer hesitated. The remaining 6. We have leads. Financial records from Reeves's office show cash transactions with buyers who used false names. We're running them now. Dogfighting rings? Probably, but we'll find them, Kincaid. Every last one. Mercer didn't answer immediately, and in that silence Reese heard everything she couldn't say. The probability calculations. The statistical likelihood of survival for combat-trained dogs sold into underground fighting circuits. The brutal mathematics of time versus cruelty. We'll find them, Mercer repeated. That's the only promise I can make. Then make it count. The trials came 3 months later. Reese sat in the courtroom every day. Front row, dress uniform, Ghost beside her. It had taken a formal petition and a letter from Mercer's office, but the judge had granted special accommodation. Ghost was a service animal and a material component of the investigation. More than that, he was a witness, the only living witness to what had happened in that compound in Yemen when his handler had made the choice that cost him everything. The prosecution laid out their case with surgical precision. Elena testified about the falsified evaluations. Calm, clinical, devastating in her accuracy. She presented the original assessments, showed where they'd been altered, explained in medical terms what it meant when a veterinarian's credentials were stolen to commit fraud. And she looked directly at Reeves when she said, "These dogs didn't fail, they were failed by a system that valued profit over service." Sloan testified about the disposition pipeline, the dogs sold to fight rings, the ones that disappeared, the 14 months she'd spent tracking the corruption alone because no one else would listen. She presented photographs of Atlas when they'd found him, scars from fights, malnutrition, the hollow look in his eyes of an animal that had forgotten what kindness meant. And she said, "This is what happens when heroes become commodities." Brennan testified about the emails, the cover-up, the threats to his family, the night he'd watched dogs he loved being reclassified as defective to make room for a private company's product. He was shaking when he took the stand, but his voice was steady when he said, "I kept silent for 6 months, and every day I looked at myself in the mirror and saw a coward. I'm not that man anymore." And then Reese testified. She walked to the stand in her dress uniform, every ribbon earned, every scar earned. Ghost walked beside her, and when she sat down, the dog settled at her feet. Not anxious, not afraid, just present, the way a partner is present. The prosecutor started with the basics: her service record, her deployments, her command of K-9 units in Afghanistan, the IED blast that had ended her active duty career, but not her connection to the animals she'd served with. Then he asked about Garrett Thorne. "Lieutenant Commander Thorne was my commanding officer," Reese said. "He was also my mentor, my friend, and the person who taught me everything I know about K-9 operations." "When did you learn about Operation Sandstorm?" "I was stateside when it happened. Medical evaluation. I got the news through official channels 28 hours after the raid. Killed in action. Heroic sacrifice. The kind of words that are supposed to make it hurt less. They don't." "When did you learn the truth about what happened?" Reese looked at Reeves, looked at Kane, sitting 2 tables away with 3 lawyers between him and the world, looked at the jury, 12 faces that would decide whether Garrett's death meant anything or disappeared into the bureaucratic noise of a system that protected its own. 3 months ago, in a kitchen in Colorado, looking at emails that proved the intelligence package for Operation Sandstorm was known to be unverified. That Richard Kane chose profit over American lives. That Commander Reeves chose bribes over his oath. And that Garrett Thorne chose his dog over himself. Her voice didn't waver, didn't break, just delivered the facts the way she'd been trained to deliver mission reports. Clear, direct, unambiguous. The intel package was marked high confidence. It should have been marked unverified. Garrett's team walked into a compound based on targeting data that Aegis Global knew was incomplete. The entry point was compromised. The compound layout was wrong, and Garrett died shielding Ghost from an IED that never should have been there. Because if Kane and Reeves had told the truth, the mission would have been delayed, and a delay would have exposed the dog replacement scheme they'd been running for 2 years. The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence where even breathing feels too loud. They didn't just fail him, Reese said. They murdered him. And then they took the dog he died protecting and put that dog in a cage and tried to sell him for $500. She leaned forward, looked directly at Kane. Garrett Thorne was worth more than $40 million. Every dog in that disposition center was worth more than your entire company. And if there's any justice in this court, you'll spend the rest of your life remembering that. The verdicts came 2 weeks later. Richard Kane, convicted on all counts: conspiracy, fraud, falsification of military intelligence, and the charge that mattered most: accessory to the murder of a United States service member. 32 years in federal prison, no parole. Commander Frank Reeves, convicted on 14 counts: corruption, fraud, falsification of military records, animal cruelty, conspiracy. 20 years. Reese was in the courtroom when the judge read the sentences. Ghost sat beside her. And when the words 32 years echoed off the walls, Ghost's tail moved. Once, slow, deliberate. The wag of a dog who understood, somehow, that something had shifted. That the people who had hurt him and hurt Garrett were going away. That it was over. "We won, buddy," Reese whispered. "Garrett can rest now." The Aegis Global contract was voided. The company was dissolved. Every asset was seized by the federal government and redirected into a fund for military working dog welfare and veteran mental health services. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The money that was supposed to profit from replacing heroes would now be used to save them. Garrett Thorne was posthumously awarded the Navy Cross, the second highest decoration for valor in the United States Navy. The citation read, "For extraordinary heroism in the face of enemy action and for the ultimate sacrifice in protection of his canine partner, demonstrating the highest traditions of the United States Naval Service." Reese attended the ceremony at Arlington, full dress uniform, Ghost beside her, wearing a new collar with Garrett's old dog tags attached. Tags that Maggie Thorne had kept in a box by her bed for 28 months, waiting for the day she could put them where they belonged. The ceremony was small: family, close friends, a handful of operators from Garrett's unit, and Reese standing at attention while Maggie accepted the medal with shaking hands and tears streaming down her face. When it was over, when the honor guard had folded the flag and presented it with the precision that comes from doing something so many times you could do it in your sleep, Maggie found Reese. "He's wearing his daddy's tags," Maggie whispered, looking down at Ghost. "He knows, doesn't he? He knows what these mean." Reese couldn't speak. She just nodded. Maggie knelt down. Ghost came to her immediately, pressed his body against her legs, made a sound that was part whine, part cry, the sound of recognition, the sound of a dog who remembered this woman, this voice, this smell, the person who had been there before the deployments, before the war, before everything changed. And Maggie wrapped her arms around Ghost and sobbed. Not the quiet, controlled tears of a military ceremony, the raw, broken sobs of a mother who had lost her son and found a piece of him in a dog that remembered. "I looked for you," Maggie said into Ghost's fur. "I called everyone. I wrote letters. Nobody would tell me where you were. Nobody would answer." Reese knelt beside them. "I'm sorry. They hid him. They tried to erase him. But Garrett made me promise to bring him home, and I don't break promises." Maggie looked up. Her face was wet. Her eyes were red. But there was something in them that hadn't been there before. Not closure exactly, but the beginning of it, the first breath after drowning. "Thank you," Maggie said. "Thank you for fighting for him, for fighting for my son, for making sure they didn't get away with it. Garrett would have done the same for me. I know. That's who he was." Maggie looked down at Ghost. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything. When you brought him to me in Virginia Beach after his surgery, you told me the truth about how Garrett died, about the intel, about the corruption." Maggie's voice steadied. Was it quick?" Reese had been dreading this question for 3 months, but she owed Maggie the truth. The blast was catastrophic, but Garrett's last conscious act was shielding Ghost. The medevac team said he was asking about the dog, making sure Ghost was okay. Even at the end, he was protecting him. Maggie nodded, tears still streaming. "That sounds like Garrett. He told me once that the bond between a handler and their dog wasn't just tactical. It was sacred. He meant it. He loved this dog more than anything." Maggie scratched behind Ghost's ears. "And Ghost loved him back. You can see it. Even now, even after everything." Ghost pressed harder against Maggie, the same way he used to press against Garrett. The gesture that meant, "I'm here. I remember. I haven't forgotten." "I need to tell you something," Maggie said, "about the day you brought him to me. You don't have to." "I do." Maggie's voice was firm, the voice of a mother who'd lost a son and found a piece of him in a dog that remembered. "When Ghost recognized me, when he ran to me and cried, I felt Garrett in that moment. Not gone, present, saying goodbye the way he never got to. Through his dog, through you." She took Reese's hand. "My son saw something in you that the Navy couldn't. The ability to lead not because someone gave you permission, but because you refused to accept that some fights aren't worth fighting. He was right about you. He made me who I am." "No, he saw who you were. There's a difference." Maggie smiled. "And now you're doing for others what he did for you. Training women who face the same doubts you faced. Giving them a mentor who'll believe in them the way Garrett believed in you. That's legacy, Reese. That's how he lives on." Ghost pressed against Maggie's leg. The gesture Garrett used to do. The way he'd lean against his mother when words weren't enough. The dog had learned it from him, and now the dog was teaching Reese. "He's happy at the foundation," Maggie said, looking down at Ghost. "I can see it, and I think Garrett would want him there, with you, doing the work he started." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. Ghost has 2 homes now. Mine, when he needs to remember, and yours, when he needs to serve. That's what Garrett would want. For his dog to keep being a soldier. For you to keep being a commander. For both of you to prove that the fight wasn't for nothing." The missing dogs came home in waves. The 2 in Texas were recovered first, seized from the private security company in a raid coordinated by NCIS and local animal enforcement. Both were underweight. Both had untreated injuries. But both responded to military commands the moment they heard them, snapping to attention like soldiers who had been waiting for someone to remember they existed. Then over the following weeks, 3 more were traced through financial records and witness interviews. One was found in a basement in Ohio, another in a fenced yard in Alabama, the third in a warehouse in Missouri that law enforcement had been monitoring as part of a dogfighting investigation. Each recovery was a victory. Each dog that came back was a piece of the puzzle being restored. The final 3 were the hardest. The trail had gone cold. False names, cash transactions, deleted records. Sloan spent weeks working the rescue network, calling shelters, posting alerts, following rumors that led nowhere. And then suddenly, somewhere, one by one they surfaced. A shepherd named Bolt in Kentucky, chained to a post in a yard, so emaciated the rescue team had to carry him. A female named Talon in Pennsylvania, found wandering a rural road. And finally, Shadow. 9 years of service, 3 combat deployments. A detection dog who had saved more lives than anyone would ever be able to count. He was found on a rural property in Kentucky, chained, dehydrated, his spirit so broken that when Reese arrived, Shadow didn't even lift his head. She knelt in front of him and spoke in the quiet, steady voice that handlers use when they're talking to an animal that has forgotten what kindness sounds like. "Hey, buddy, you're safe now. You're going home." Shadow didn't respond, didn't lift his head, didn't wag his tail, just lay there breathing, existing in the hollow space between alive and gone. Havoc walked up to Shadow and lay down beside him, pressed his body against the broken dog's side and stayed there, not moving, not demanding, just present, for 4 hours, until Shadow finally, slowly, turned his head and touched his nose to Havoc's ear. "That's it," Reese whispered. "That's the start." Over the following months, all 15 dogs found their way to the foundation. The 2 from Texas arrived in a transport van, escorted by NCIS, thin but alive, responsive to commands, grateful for grass under their paws. The 3 traced through financial records came next. Bolt, who'd been kept in a basement for 8 months. Talon, who'd forgotten what sunlight felt like. And Recon, a detection dog from the Missouri warehouse, who'd been hours away from a fighting ring when local police raided it. Each arrival was a victory. Each dog added to the pack running across the Foundation's fields was proof that the system could be beaten, that heroes didn't have to be disposable. And Shadow, the last one found, became the symbol of it all. The dog who'd been so broken he couldn't walk, now running with the pack, teaching Reese and her team that recovery wasn't just possible, it was inevitable if someone cared enough to fight for it. 6 months after the trials, Reese stood on the porch of the coastal property she'd purchased with the settlement money from a civil suit against Aegis Global's dissolved assets. The land stretched out before her, open fields, ocean views, space enough for 15 dogs to run without ever seeing a fence. The sign at the entrance read, "The Thorne Kincaid Canine Foundation," named for the mentor who had believed in her and the mission he'd left unfinished. 15 dogs ran across the field below. Ajax led the pack as always. His hips were better now. Supplements, physical therapy, and the simple medicine of open space had restored something the kennel had tried to steal. Scout trotted beside him, nose working the ground with the professional dedication of a dog who would never fully retire from the job that defined him. Storm moved slower than the others, but he moved. Every step a defiance, every breath a victory. The cardiologist had said 6 months, maybe a year. That was 8 months ago. Storm was still running. And Shadow, the last dog recovered, the one they'd almost lost. Shadow was running slowly, uncertainly, with the tentative joy of an animal rediscovering that his legs still worked, and the world still had grass, and the sun still felt warm on his back. He ran behind the pack at first, then beside them, and when Ajax circled back and bumped his shoulder, an invitation, a welcome, Shadow's tail moved for the first time since Kentucky. The property had been transformed. What was once empty coastal land was now a fully operational foundation, medical facility, training grounds, rehabilitation center, office space, and a house where Reese lived with Havoc and Ghost, and the mission that had saved her as much as she'd saved them. The Foundation's mission was threefold: rescue retired military working dogs, match them with combat veterans suffering from PTSD, and train the next generation of canine handlers with a specific emphasis on recruiting and supporting women who wanted to follow the path Garrett had cleared. Within 6 months, they'd matched 47 veterans with dogs. The waiting list had grown to 300 names. The VA had reached out about a formal partnership, and applications for the Canine Handler Training Program had come in from 38 women across 12 states. Sloan ran the daily operations, managing intake, coordinating with rescue networks, tracking down the dogs that were still out there, still lost, still waiting for someone to bring them home. Elena headed the medical program, treating injuries, managing rehabilitation, and teaching a generation of military veterinarians that their oath was to the animals first, the system second. Brennan trained the handlers, teaching them the skills he'd learned over 20 years. But more than that, teaching them the lesson he'd learned the hard way. That courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing the right thing when fear tells you to stay silent. And Colonel James Hawk Morrison, 66 years old and technically retired, showed up 3 days a week to work with the dogs, tell war stories, and remind everyone that the bond between a soldier and their dog wasn't just tactical. It was sacred. The one-year anniversary ceremony happened on a clear February morning. Veterans came from across 3 states, military families, Gold Star parents, handlers who'd served with the dogs that now ran free on the Foundation's land, news crews, local officials, and a crowd of civilians who'd watched Reese's video a year ago and hadn't been able to forget it. Reese hadn't planned to speak, but Sloan was nodding, Hawk was nodding, and 15 dogs were arranged around her like a military formation, waiting for their commander to say something that mattered. "A year ago," Reese began, "I walked into Fort Carson and saw 12 dogs in cages, heroes being sold like equipment. People said, 'You're just one retired female captain. You can't fight the system.'" Ajax barked once. The crowd laughed through their tears. "But I learned from Garrett Thorne that leadership isn't about permission. It's about responsibility. These dogs didn't ask for recognition. They didn't ask for medals. They just did their jobs, protected us, loved us, asked for nothing in return." Reese paused, looked at Ghost, standing beside Maggie Thorne in the front row, wearing Garrett's dog tags. "Garrett told me once that the day would come when I'd have to choose between career and doing the right thing. He said, 'Choose the right thing, Reese. The career will sort itself out.' He was right. I lost my Navy career, but I found my mission." She looked at the crowd, at the veterans, at the young women who'd come to ask about the training program. "To every veteran here, your service matters. Your struggles matter. These dogs understand because they've been there." To every young woman thinking about canine work, Garrett believed I could lead when no one else did. "I believe in you. Apply. Prove them wrong like I did." Reese raised her hand. "To Garrett Thorne, to Ghost, to every dog who served in silence, and to second chances, for all of us." The crowd raised their hands. To second chances. 3 months later, something unexpected happened. Reese received a call from an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, then recognized the area code. "Arlington, Virginia. Captain Kincaid? Speaking. This is Admiral Patricia Hendricks, Judge Advocate General of the Navy. I'm calling to inform you that your medical retirement status has been reviewed." Reese's stomach dropped. This was it. The retaliation. They were going to strip her pension for the extraction. "Based on Captain Reese Kincaid, if you choose to accept, you would command the newly established Military Working Dog Welfare Division, reporting directly to the Secretary of the Navy." Silence. "Ma'am?" Reese looked out the window, at the 15 dogs running across the field, at Sloan coordinating with a new rescue team, at Elena treating a dog that had just arrived from Tennessee, at Brennan working with 3 female trainees, at Hawk telling a story that made everyone laugh, at Ghost lying in the sun beside Havoc, both dogs watching her through the window with those amber and brown eyes. Calm, content, home. "No." "Ma'am?" "Thank you, Admiral, but no. My command is here. With the dogs who have nowhere else to go, with the veterans who the system failed, with the women who are still being told they don't belong." Another pause. "I understand, Captain. For what it's worth, I think you're exactly where you need to be." "So do I." When Reese hung up, Ghost was watching her, tail wagging slowly. "Yeah, buddy," she said. "I chose right." The Foundation's 2nd anniversary fell on a Tuesday. Reese woke early, before dawn, the way she always did. Old habits from a military career that had ended on paper, but never really left her body. She walked outside with a cup of coffee and stood on the porch, watching the field where 15 dogs were already stirring. Ajax shaking off sleep, Scout stretching, Storm moving, carefully, but moving. Shadow playing with a younger dog they'd rescued 2 weeks ago, a 2-year-old shepherd named Echo, who'd been retired after an injury, but was young enough to remember what joy felt like. And Ghost, 7 years old now, healthy, strong, running across the field with the pack, leading a training exercise for 3 new handlers, 2 women and 1 man, all learning the skills that Garrett had passed to Reese, that Reese was now passing to them. Havoc came out and sat beside her, 7 years old now, slower than before, but still sharp, gray around the muzzle, but still her partner in every way that mattered. "We did it, buddy," Reese said quietly. "We kept the promise." Havoc leaned against her leg, the gesture that meant, "I know, I was there, I helped." Her phone buzzed. A message from Sloan. "Just got word, they found the last one. The 15th dog from the original 23. Female shepherd named Liberty. She was in a shelter in Montana under a different name. But her chip came back military. NCIS, confirmed. She's coming home." Reese read the message twice, felt something in her chest expand and settle. All 15. Every dog from the original disposition list. Every dog that Reeves and Kane had tried to erase. Home. Safe. Alive. She looked at Ghost, running across the field, teaching new handlers the difference between commands and respect, between obedience and partnership, between an animal doing a job and a warrior fulfilling a calling. "We got them all, Garrett," Reese whispered. "Every single one, just like you asked." The wind carried her words toward the ocean, and somewhere in the space between memory and morning, Reese could almost feel Garrett's presence, not haunting, not grieving, just there, watching. Proud. The way a mentor watches when the student finally understands that the lesson was never about the mission. It was always about what you do after the mission ends. When the cameras are off, when the medals are awarded, when the system moves on to the next crisis and the heroes are forgotten. That's when leadership matters. That's when promises are kept. That's when you prove that loyalty isn't a contract with an expiration date. It's a covenant that survives death and corruption and time itself. Reese finished her coffee, called the dogs in for breakfast, and walked back inside the house that Garrett's memory had built, carrying the torch he'd passed to her, keeping the flame alive for the warriors, human and canine, who would come after. The fight wasn't over. There were still dogs out there, still corruption to root out, still systems to fix, still women to train, still veterans to heal. But for the first time in 2 years, Reese Kincaid felt something she hadn't felt since the day the IED blast had taken her career. Purpose. Not the kind assigned by orders, the kind chosen by conviction. The kind that survives retirement and medical discharge, and every bureaucrat who says no because the system was never designed to care about the things that matter most. Ghost walked up the porch steps, sat beside her, looked up with eyes that no longer carried 28 months of grief, just calm, just trust, just the simple certainty of a dog who knows his person will never leave him behind. "Mission accomplished, Commander Thorne," Reese said softly. "Your dog is home, your legacy lives, and the next generation knows your name." Ghost's tail wagged, slow, steady, the wag that means, "I know, and I'm proud of you too." The sun broke over the horizon. Golden light spilled across the field. 15 dogs ran free. And on the porch of a house built on sacrifice and stubbornness, and the kind of love that refuses to accept that some lives are expendable, Reese Kincaid stood watch. The way a commander stands watch. The way a soldier keeps faith. The way a woman who was told she didn't belong proved that belonging was never about permission. It was always about showing up, standing up, and refusing to walk away when the right thing costs everything. That was the lesson Garrett Thorne taught her. That was the lesson she would teach the women who came after. That was the legacy that would outlive them all. Loyalty isn't a contract, it's a covenant. And some promises are worth keeping, no matter the cost.